The Zervik's patrol fleet drifted through the cold vacuum of space, their sleek, metallic warships cutting through the darkness like silent predators. The Vor Empire had ruled the stars for centuries, their cybernetic warriors enforcing their dominion with ruthless efficiency. To them, humans were nothing more than pests, weak, fragile, and unworthy of the cosmos. Commander Xeltor stood on the bridge of his battleship, his red mechanical eyes scanning the data feed from his scouts. A lone human cargo vessel had appeared on their long-range sensors, floating near the edge of Vor-controlled space. It looked damaged, barely functional, as if it had been drifting for weeks. "Human ship detected," one of his officers announced. "Minimal energy readings. No visible weapons. Just floating." Xeltor sneered. "Typical humans. Always weak, always helpless. Run a DEET scan. I want to know if there's anything worth salvaging." The scanners hummed, sending waves of invisible energy across the small vessel. The results flickered across the screens. Human life signs detected, but weak. No active defenses. No escape pods. It looked abandoned, like a derelict ghost ship. "A distress signal is coming from the ship," the officer continued. Faint, but repeating. Xeltor leaned forward. "Put it through." A garbled transmission crackled through the comms, a static-filled voice barely audible. "Anyone, please, help us. Drifting. No time." Then silence. Xeltor smirked. "Pathetic. They don't even have the strength to send a proper distress call." "Orders, Commander," one of his lieutenants asked. "Send a boarding party," he ordered. "I want to see what's inside before we decide whether to destroy it." The Vor were not fools. They had crushed humanity in battle many times before, but they had also learned that humans could be deceptive, full of tricks. Their small size and biological nature made them weak, but their adaptability made them dangerous. This could be a trap. But Xeltor doubted it. His cybernetic warriors were the pinnacle of evolution. Metal, machine, and intelligence fused into the perfect killing force. A few dying humans inside a broken ship posed no threat to them. The Vor boarding vessel detached from the battleship and drifted toward the silent human freighter. Inside, a team of 10 Vor soldiers sat in rigid silence, their metallic bodies humming softly with the power of their cybernetic implants. They felt no fear, no anxiety, only duty. The ship's docking clamps engaged, locking onto the human vessel's airlock with a sharp hiss. The Vor soldiers stepped forward, weapons raised, their red eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The airlock door creaked open with a slow mechanical groan, revealing the darkness beyond. Inside, the human ship was silent. Dim, flickering emergency lights cast long shadows against the walls. The air was thick with an odd humidity, almost organic, like breathing in something alive. One of the Vor soldiers stepped inside first, his boots echoing against the metal floor. His scanners picked up strange inconsistencies, walls that seemed warped, surfaces that were slightly uneven, as if the metal itself had shifted. "Commander, we have entered the ship," the squad leader reported through the comms. Xeltor's voice crackled in response. "Proceed with caution. Find the crew. Kill them if necessary." The Vor soldiers moved deeper into the ship, weapons scanning every corner. There was no movement, no sound except for the occasional flickering of the dying lights. Then the first soldier stopped. His head twitched slightly, his sensors picking up something, a faint heartbeat. But it was wrong. It wasn't coming from one place. It was everywhere. "Did you hear that?" one of the Vor muttered. The others turned. "Hear what?" A sharp metallic scraping echoed from deeper inside the ship. "Show yourself, human." The squad leader barked, his mechanical voice echoing through the corridor. His cybernetic HUD scanned for movement, but the readings flickered, as if something was interfering with their systems. The sound came again, a slow, dragging noise, like flesh and metal scraping together. One of the Vor turned a corner, his rifle raised. His red mechanical eyes scanned the darkness, and then his entire body locked up. There, just ahead, was a human body. At least, it had once been human. The figure was fused to the wall, its body half sunken into the metal. Its skin had merged with the structure, veins extending into the ship itself like roots. Its eyes, milky white, lifeless, stared forward, mouth slightly open. And then, it blinked. The Vor soldier stumbled backward, his weapons trembling slightly. Impossible. The thing on the wall smiled. "Commander, we have a problem," the squad leader whispered. A voice crackled over their comms, but it wasn't from Keltor. It was human. "You shouldn't have come here." Then the lights went out. Everything was pitch black. The Vor switched to night vision, but the ship's walls shimmered, disrupting their visuals. A sudden scream echoed through the corridor. One of their soldiers vanished into the dark. Gunfire erupted. Red laser streaks flashed for a split second before another chilling, wet-tearing sound filled the air. "Fall back," the squad leader shouted. But it was too late. Something moved in the darkness. A shifting, slithering mass of flesh and metal, whispering in voices that did not belong to the living. The Vor were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. Back on the command ship, Higgeltor listened to the comms, his mechanical face frozen in disbelief. The transmission was breaking apart, filled with garbled screams, gunfire, and something else. Something wet, something alive. Then, a final voice. A whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." And then, silence. The Vor soldiers moved cautiously through the dark, silent corridors of the human ship. Their red mechanical eyes scanned the surroundings, but their advanced sensors were glitching, unable to provide a clear reading of the ship's interior. The walls were covered in something strange. What should have been cold metal felt almost organic. The air was thick, damp, and unnervingly warm. It was wrong. "Something is interfering with our scanners," one of the Vor muttered, his voice carrying an artificial hum due to his cybernetic implants. The squad leader, a towering figure covered in sleek Vor armor, ignored the soldiers' unease. "Our mission is simple," he said. "We locate any surviving humans and eliminate them. Keep moving." The Vor advanced deeper into the ship, their heavy metallic footsteps echoing in the stillness. The emergency lights flickered, casting brief flashes of red and white across the walls. With each flicker, it almost seemed like the walls moved. One of the Vor stopped, his weapon raised. "I heard something," he said. The others turned toward him, their weapons primed. "Where?" The soldier hesitated. I don't know." It was like a whisper. Another flicker of the emergency lights, another moment of near darkness. And then, a faint scraping sound from the corridor ahead. The Vor instinctively aimed their weapons toward the source, but when the lights steadied again, there was nothing there. "Commander, are you seeing this?" the squad leader said into his comms. Zeltor's voice crackled through the line from the command ship. "Your audio is breaking up. What's your status?" "Something is interfering with our equipment," the squad leader replied. "We are detecting movement, but our scanners aren't picking up anything solid." "Your orders remain the same," Zeltor said. "Continue forward." The Vor soldiers moved again, more cautiously this time. The deeper they went, the stranger the ship became. The floors were slightly uneven, the walls had bulges that should not have been there. In some places, the metal seemed to pulse, like a living thing. Then one of the Vor soldiers stumbled. He caught himself quickly, but when he looked down, his eyes widened. The floor where he had stepped sank slightly under his weight, like flesh instead of metal. He lifted his foot. A thin, shiny residue stretched between his boot and the floor before snapping apart. "This isn't right," he muttered. "Keep moving," the squad leader ordered, though even his voice had lost some of its confidence. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. The Vor soldiers turned in unison, their rifles aimed into the shadows. The emergency lights flickered once more, and for the briefest second, they saw something move at the far end of the corridor. A shape, tall, twisted, not quite human. Then darkness again. One of the Vor exhaled sharply, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something here." "Form up," the squad leader ordered. The Vor soldiers tightened their formation, weapons ready. A new sound filled the corridor. Drip, drip, drip. The Vor soldier at the rear looked up. His red mechanical eyes widened. Something was hanging from the ceiling. It was a body. At least it had once been a body. Now it was barely more than a hollowed-out husk, its flesh stretched thin, its limbs fused into the ceiling itself. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its empty eye sockets seemed to stare directly at the Vor soldier beneath it. The Vor took a step back. His boots squelched. He looked down. The floor was covered in a thin layer of fleshy, pulsating material. And then, the body on the ceiling twitched. The Vor soldier did not scream. He was trained for war, designed for efficiency. But his body locked up, frozen by something he could not understand. "Commander," he whispered into his comms, "we are not alone." The squad leader turned. "What is it?" A sudden movement in the corner of his vision. The lights flickered, and one of their soldiers was just gone. No scream, no struggle, just gone. The remaining Vor whirled around, weapons ready. The squad leader checked his helmet's interface. "Unit 3. Report." Silence. The Vor scanned the area, moving in a tight formation. They had trained for this. They had fought in wars against creatures far deadlier than humans. And yet, a new sensation crept into their cybernetic minds, something they had never truly felt before. Fear. A faint, wet sound echoed from further down the corridor. Drip, drip, drip. The squad leader activated his shoulder-mounted flashlight, sweeping the beam across the corridor. It landed on the wall ahead. The Vor froze. The wall was not a wall. It was moving. Shapes began to emerge. Faces, human faces, twisted, stretched, fused into the ship itself. Their mouths moved silently, their expressions frozen in agony. And then, one of the faces spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The Vor opened fire. Their energy weapons roared to life, scorching the walls with searing red plasma. The corridor lit up with the glow of their attack. And then the walls screamed. A high-pitched, unnatural wail filled the ship as the flesh-like material absorbed the blasts. The Vor watched in horror as their own weapons had no effect. Then the whispers started. Not from the walls, not from the comms, but from inside their own minds. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come here." The Vor squad leader gritted his teeth, shaking his head to clear it. "Regroup. Back to the airlock. We're leaving." But as they turned, the corridor behind them was not the same one they had entered. The path back was gone, replaced by pulsing, twisting walls of flesh. And then, the lights went out. For the first time in their existence, the Vor felt true terror. The Vor soldiers stood in pitch-black darkness, their cybernetic eyes struggling to adjust. Their enhanced vision should have been enough to cut through the shadows, but something was interfering. Their HUDs glitched, flickering between static and unreadable data. Their weapons, once steady, felt useless in their hands. The ship had changed. The corridor behind them, which should have led back to the airlock, was gone, replaced by walls that seemed to pulse, shifting in slow, unnatural movements. The air was thick, humid, filled with a scent that none of them could identify. It wasn't oil. It wasn't metal. It was something alive. The whispers returned. Soft, overlapping voices slipping into their minds. "You shouldn't have come here." The Vor squad leader forced himself to stay focused. "Move. Follow my signal." The squad started forward, their boots squelching against the fleshy surface beneath them. It no longer felt like they were walking on metal. It was softer, wetter, wrong. One of the soldiers stopped, his red eyes wide. "Commander, the walls. There." A sharp, wet tearing sound cut through the darkness. The Vor turned just in time to see something shoot out from the wall, a fleshy tendril, twisting unnaturally fast. It wrapped around the soldier's torso, yanking him back before he could fire his weapon. There was no scream, just a sickening crunch, and then he was gone. The squad leader's mechanical heart pumped faster, his mind processing the loss in cold, logical calculations. 3 soldiers down. The enemy, unknown. "Open fire," he commanded. The remaining Vor unleashed their weapons, red plasma streaking through the corridor, burning through the darkness. The wall screamed, not just the sound of scorching metal, but something deeper, a cry of pain, as if the ship itself was alive. For a brief moment, the red glow of plasma fire illuminated their surroundings. That was when they saw it. The walls were not walls. They were bodies, hundreds of human forms, fused together, their flesh stretched and merged with the structure of the ship. Some had recognizable faces, others were unformed masses of muscle and bone. Their eyes followed the Vor, their lips moved, but they made no sound. And then, all at once, they spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." One of the Vor let out a metallic snarl. "This isn't possible." Then the floor shifted. A rippling movement traveled beneath their feet, like a great muscle tensing, preparing to strike. The Vor barely had time to react before the ground beneath them split open. A chasm of shifting, writhing flesh appeared, glistening with something wet and dark, and rising from it, something monstrous. At first, it looked vaguely human, but it wasn't. It was twisted, stretched, its limbs too long, its body moving like liquid and flesh at the same time. Its eyes, if they could even be called that, were voids of darkness, staring deep into the Vor's mechanical souls. Its mouth was filled with jagged, shifting teeth, constantly changing shape. And then it spoke. Not with words, but with a feeling. A pressure inside the Vor's minds, filling them with images. Pain, fear, agony, absorption. The Vor soldiers were machines, built to fight, built to kill. But what they felt now was not war. It was hunger. A deep, endless hunger radiated from the creature, a force that pulled at them, dragged at them, like the gravity of a dying star. One of the Vor opened fire again, red plasma searing into the creature's chest. For a moment, the attack seemed to work. The flesh burned, blackened, and cracked. And then, it regrew, faster than anything they had ever seen. The burned flesh twisted, bubbled, and sealed itself shut, leaving no trace of damage. The Vor soldier took a step back. That's impossible. The creature tilted its head, and then it lunged. It moved too fast for something so large, too fluid, as if it wasn't bound by the same physical rules. Its arms stretched, longer than it should be, fingers fusing into a mass of razor-sharp bone. It slammed into the nearest Vor, its arm punching through metal armor like paper. The Vor soldier collapsed, his body twitching. Then, to the horror of the others, the creature absorbed him. The fallen Vor's body began to dissolve, his metal and flesh pulled into the creature's form. His red cybernetic eyes blinked in confusion as he was sucked inside, his body merging with the thing. For a brief moment, the soldier's face appeared on the creature's shifting surface, and he screamed. Then he was gone. The Vor squad leader made a decision. Fall back. Now. The remaining soldiers turned and ran, their cybernetic legs carrying them faster than any human could ever hope to move. The corridor stretched before them, twisting and warping, the very ship fighting to keep them inside. The whispers grew louder. "You shouldn't have come here." The Vor did not stop. Their mechanical bodies slammed through a wall, tearing into the bulkhead. But instead of metal, the inside was soft, like breaking through muscle and bone. They didn't care. They pushed forward, desperate to escape. Behind them, the creature followed. It did not run. It flowed, its body shifting and twisting, moving through the walls, through the ship, becoming the ship. And then, finally, a door. The Vor saw the airlock ahead, their escape. But before they could reach it, the door vanished. It melted into the wall, becoming another mass of shifting flesh. The Vor skidded to a halt. The whispers became one voice, a voice that filled the entire ship, the entire space around them. A voice that was every voice, every human that had ever set foot on this ship, every soldier that had ever died. A voice that was not one being, but many. And it spoke one final time. You are part of us now. And then, the lights went out. The Vor stood frozen as the last remnants of the airlock melted away, absorbed into the shifting, breathing walls. The ship was no longer a structure of steel and wires. It was alive. The flesh pulsed, veins throbbing beneath the surface, spreading outward like a living, growing organism. The Vor squad leader's mind processed the situation at inhuman speed. Their escape route was gone. Their enemy was everywhere. And the whispers had grown into something worse, a presence inside their minds, clawing at their thoughts, forcing them to hear the voices of the dead. You are part of us now. Open fire, the squad leader roared. Their weapons lit up the darkness, plasma rounds scorching the walls, burning the flesh with each shot. The ship screamed, a high-pitched wail that vibrated through their armor. The Vor didn't stop. They kept firing, their red energy beams carving through the corridor, tearing into the pulsing walls. Smoke and scorched flesh filled the air. For a moment, it looked like they were winning. And then the walls fought back. Tendrils shot out, long, sinewy masses of muscle and bone, striking with inhuman speed. One of the Vor soldiers was caught mid-shot, a tendril wrapping around his arm, yanking him backward. He fired blindly as he was pulled toward the wall, his screams turning into static interference in their comms. The others watched in horror as the wall opened, revealing a gaping, wet maw lined with hundreds of shifting teeth. The soldier barely had time to struggle before he was dragged inside, the fleshy mass closing around him like a wound sealing shut. And then he was gone. The Vor squad leader didn't hesitate. He threw a plasma grenade at the spot where his soldier had disappeared. The explosion ripped through the corridor, flesh and bone splattering against the walls. The ship screamed again, louder this time, the sound vibrating through their metallic bodies. But the horror wasn't over. From the rubble of burned flesh, something began to form. The Vor watched as the pieces of the fallen soldier moved, drawn together like magnetic shards. The armor, the cybernetics, the organic components, they fused into something new. And then it stood. It was no longer their soldier. It was something else. Its body was a twisted, corrupted version of what it once was, half metal, half flesh, its limbs stretching unnaturally, its face shifting between expressions of pain and rage. And then it attacked. The creature lunged, its elongated arms morphing into jagged blades. One Vor barely dodged in time, but another was too slow. The creature's arm sliced through his armor, cutting deep. The Vor soldier staggered back, his systems flooding with damage alerts. But the wound was wrong. The edges of the cut weren't just bleeding. They were changing, tendrils of living flesh spreading outward, merging with his armor. The Vor gritted his teeth, trying to resist, but the corruption was spreading fast. "Commander," he gasped, his voice filled with something the Vor were never supposed to feel: terror. Without hesitation, the squad leader fired a shot directly into his soldier's head. The Vor collapsed, his body twitching as the flesh still tried to move. But this time, he stayed down. The squad leader turned to the remaining soldiers. "Keep moving. We need to find another way out." They ran. The corridor twisted around them, the walls shifting like living intestines, trying to trap them. They fired their weapons as they ran, burning through the tendrils that tried to block their path. The whispers continued, growing louder, turning into a chorus of overlapping voices. Why do you resist? You were never meant to escape. Join us. The Vor ignored them. Their bodies were built for war, and they would not fall here. Then, movement ahead. Something huge was blocking their path. A mass of shifting flesh, faces and limbs emerging and disappearing within it, an amalgamation of all who had been consumed. The Vor squad leader didn't hesitate. Concentrate fire. They unleashed everything: plasma rounds, grenades, high-powered energy blasts. The creature shrieked, its form melting and reforming, struggling to hold its shape. It lashed out, tendrils whipping toward them like living spears. One Vor was impaled, his body yanked into the creature's mass, disappearing into the writhing horror. Another was grabbed by the leg, his cybernetic limb ripped off in a spray of blackened metal and synthetic blood. But the Vor kept fighting. The squad leader activated his last resort: a detonator. Their suits carried small nuclear charges, designed to wipe out everything within a contained radius in case of total mission failure. And this was failure. He activated the countdown. Fall back, he commanded. The remaining Vor sprinted as the detonator beeped, counting down the final seconds. The creature sensed it, its mass shifting wildly, tendrils lashing out in desperation. No, the word wasn't spoken. It was screamed into their minds. The Vor ran faster. The walls collapsed inward, the ship trying to consume them before they could escape. The squad leader detonated the charge. A blinding explosion ripped through the ship, fire and energy consuming the nightmare. The Vor did not look back. They forced their way through the burning wreckage, their armor searing from the heat, their systems overloading. And then, a breach, an opening in the ship's hull. They jumped. The Vor were built for survival, their bodies designed to withstand the vacuum of space. They escaped the ship, their forms blasted outward as fire and debris followed behind them. The last thing they saw before the shockwave hit. The ship was still alive. Even as it burned, even as pieces of it were torn apart by the explosion, it was still moving, still trying to reform. And deep inside the wreckage, the whispers did not stop. You cannot destroy us. We are endless. We will find you. Then, silence. The Vor squad leader drifted through the void, his cybernetic mind processing everything. They had escaped, but the horror remained, and somewhere, in the darkness of space, it was still growing. The Vor squad leader drifted in the void, his mechanical body battered, his systems barely functional. The explosion had crippled the ship, but even as he stared at its burning wreckage, he knew the truth. The thing inside wasn't gone. It was never truly gone. He sent a distress signal, his remaining squad members doing the same. Their cybernetic bodies allowed them to survive in open space, but not forever. If their fleet didn't arrive soon, they would be floating corpses before long. Then, through the static of his damaged comms, a signal crackled to life, one that filled him with both relief and dread. The Vor fleet had arrived. But so had the humans. Two forces emerged from the darkness. Massive Vor warships, their black hulls lined with pulsating red lights, and a fleet of human vessels, sleek, metallic, and strangely calm. The Vor commander's red cybernetic eyes flickered as he patched into his fleet's communication channels. "Commander, what happened?" his admiral demanded. "We lost all readings from the ship. What was inside?" The squad leader hesitated. He was Vor, built for war, trained to suppress fear. But the thing he had just survived was beyond war. "The ship," he said, his voice cold. "It was never just a ship. It was alive. A living entity. A weapon unlike anything we've ever faced." Silence followed. Then, another voice cut in. "Human. Ah. So, you met the flesh." The Vor commander's circuits flared. The voice belonged to a human general, his tone almost amused. "We figured one of you would stumble upon it eventually," the human continued. You're lucky you got out. Most don't. The Vor's hands clenched. You knew about this. Oh, we didn't just know, the human said. We built it. The Vor's systems froze. Explain, he demanded. The human general chuckled, as if this were some inside joke only he understood. See, you Vor think you're the apex predators, the human said. Bigger fleets, stronger tech. You think your cybernetic upgrades make you better than us, but you never ask yourselves one thing. There was a pause. What happens when humans decide to fight dirty? The Vor commander's processors ran through every possibility, but the truth was already sinking in. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some lost ship corrupted by an unknown entity. This was a trap. That thing. The Vor started. Oh yeah, the human confirmed. We made it. Well, we started it. Let's just say we had some help. For the first time in his existence, the Vor commander felt something dangerously close to fear. You created a bioweapon, he stated. Not just any bioweapon, the human corrected. A self-sustaining, ever-growing, uncontrollable bioweapon, a living war machine that adapts, consumes, and repurposes everything it touches. We fed it scraps at first, criminals, war prisoners, a few unlucky volunteers. But it wanted more. So we gave it ships, soldiers, whole fleets even. And then, we let it loose. The Vor commander's circuits flared with anger. You're insane. You can't control something like that. We never intended to, the human admitted. That's the beauty of it. We don't need to. We just point it at whoever we don't like, and let it do its thing. The Vor fleet began scanning the wreckage of the flesh ship. Readings were coming in now, and they were worse than expected. The explosion hadn't killed it. It was rebuilding. You fools, the Vor commander growled. You think this thing won't turn on you? Oh, we know it will, the human said, far too casually. That's why we never keep it too close. We just drop it off in enemy territory and watch the chaos unfold. The Vor's mechanical hands tightened into fists. This was beyond war. This was madness. But the humans, they were smiling. You Vor thought you were better than us, the human general continued. You crushed our colonies. You slaughtered our people. You pushed us to the edge of extinction. And you expected us to just die. There was a pause. See, that's the thing about humans. The Vor commander braced as the human's voice turned cold. When we have nothing left to lose, we don't die quietly. And then, the wreckage of the flesh ship moved. The Vor's scanners screamed warnings. Biological mass detected. Growing. Spreading. Then, a transmission from inside the wreckage. It was a voice. Not the whispers from before. Not the horrifying chorus of absorbed minds. Something new. We hear you. The Vor's circuits froze. We understand now. The biomass shifted, forming something grotesque, something inhumanly human. We are not just flesh. We are not just hunger. The Vor fleet's weapons locked onto the wreckage, preparing to obliterate it. We are vengeance. And then, it attacked. Tendrils shot from the wreckage, latching onto the Vor warships with horrifying speed. Metal twisted, armor melted. Soldiers screamed as the ship began consuming them. The Vor commander shouted, "Fire! Fire, HFY thing!" The fleet opened fire, but the flesh was learning. It absorbed the blasts, reshaping its mass, growing stronger with every attack. The humans, they did nothing. They just watched, smiling. The Vor commander sent a desperate transmission. Help us fight this thing. It will consume everything. The human general's voice came through one last time. Yeah. A pause. That's the plan. And with that, the human fleet jumped away, leaving the Vor to die, leaving the flesh to spread, leaving humanity with the last laugh. The Vor fleet was dying. Massive warships, once the pride of their cybernetic empire, were now nothing more than floating husks, consumed from the inside out. The flesh had spread through their ranks like an unstoppable virus, turning ships into grotesque organic nightmares, merging metal and biology into something neither machine nor creature, something worse. The Vor commander drifted in his failing suit, watching the horror unfold. His fleet, the strongest force ever assembled against humanity, was being devoured. His people, cold, logical, supreme in their technology, were screaming. It was the first time in Vor history that they had known true fear, and it would be the last. The commander activated his emergency broadcast, his voice laced with an emotion no Vor had ever been programmed to feel: desperation. "This is Commander Volksen of the Vor High Fleet. To all Vor forces, do not engage the humans. Do not approach their ships. Do not attack their colonies. The threat is beyond anything we have ever encountered. The flesh is static." Then, laughter. Not Vor. Not human. Something else. "We hear you, Volksen." The Vor commander's circuits froze. The voice was his own. "We understand you now." He turned, and there, floating in the wreckage, he saw it. A twisted version of himself, its form shifting between organic matter and cybernetic plating. His own face, but warped, his red cybernetic eyes flickering with something inhuman. His voice, but layered beneath 1,000 others. "You fought us. You feared us. Now you will join us." The Vor commander tried to fire his weapon, but it was too late. Tendrils shot toward him, wrapping around his limbs, pulling him toward the mass of shifting, breathing, whispering flesh. His mind, his cybernetics, his consciousness, his everything was being unmade, absorbed. For the first time, the Vor commander understood the true horror of what the humans had done. They hadn't just unleashed a weapon. They had created a predator, one that didn't just kill, one that learned. And as the last remnants of his identity dissolved, he heard the flesh speak one final time. "Your war is over." Then, silence. The Vor fleet was gone, not destroyed, reborn. Aboard the human command ship, General Harlan leaned back in his chair, watching the destruction from a safe distance. The screens before him showed it all. Vor ships, once unstoppable, now nothing more than twisted organic constructs, reshaped into grotesque extensions of the flesh. The humans had never stood a chance in direct combat. The Vor had superior ships, superior technology, superior numbers. So, humanity did what it did best. They changed the rules of the war. "Status report," Harlan asked. A young officer swallowed hard. "The Vor fleet has been fully assimilated, sir." Harlan nodded. No celebration, no cheering, just cold, calculated victory. "Do we have confirmation of a surviving Vor command structure?" Another officer checked the scans. "Negative. Their leadership is either dead or part of it now." Harlan smirked. Perfect. The Vor had underestimated humanity. They had thought war was about ships and firepower, about brute strength. But war had never been about that. War was about adaptation. And if humanity was good at one thing, it was adapting. He turned to his second in command. "Make sure our ships maintain a safe distance from the infection zone. The flesh is useful, but we don't need it that close." The officer hesitated. "Sir, what if it spreads beyond what we can control?" Harlan laughed, a quiet, knowing laugh. "It will." The officer's expression darkened. "Then, what do we do?" Harlan leaned forward, staring at the mass of shifting, living Vor remains on the screen. "We do what we always do," he said simply. "We point it at our next enemy." Outside, in the cold abyss of space, the new Vor fleet drifted, no longer a machine of war, but a living, breathing horror. It was hungry. And the humans. They already had a new target in mind.